Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. We hear economists on the news talking about yield curves, negative GDP growth, and monetary policy all the time, right? But honestly, we rarely map those massive, invisible forces directly to our own day-to-day lives. Today, we're going to change that. We're looking at exactly how the global economy intimately shapes your personal finances, your job security, and, believe it or not, even your grocery list.
To get us started, I want you to consider a kind of quirky question. What do men's underwear and sausage sales have to do with the global economy? I know, it sounds totally bizarre, but as you'll see, massive global economic shifts alter our everyday behaviors in some incredibly intimate, unexpected ways. By the end of our time together, you'll understand exactly why top economists keep a very close eye on these specific items to figure out if we're all heading into financial danger. All right, let's dive into part 1, defining the downturn.
So, what exactly is a recession anyway? Well, if you ask the folks over at the National Bureau of Economic Research, they look for a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy, lasting more than a few months. Specifically, they're tracking measurable drops in things like real GDP, real income, employment, industrial production, and retail sales. It's a highly clinical, very data-driven framework.
But let's be real for a second. There is a stark contrast between that clinical data and our personal reality. The official shorthand you'll often hear is just 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. On a personal level, though, a recession is defined by the anxiety of job losses, the frustration of wage stagnation, and mounting consumer debt. It's the very real difference between a line dropping on a chart and a family suddenly struggling to pay their mortgage.
Which brings us to Section 2, your job on the line. You can think of the front end of a recession like a giant falling row of dominoes. Step 1, lower sales and increased costs cause corporate profit margins to fall. Step 2, companies start getting nervous, so they initiate hiring freezes and cut their business investments. Step 3, the labor market really cools off, leading directly to layoffs and wage stagnation. And finally, Step 4, to maintain their lifestyle amidst that incredibly tight cash flow, everyday consumers turn to credit, causing debt to rise significantly. It's a vicious cycle. To emphasize just how severely these dominoes can fall, let's look at a historical example. 533,000. That is the staggering number of jobs eliminated by U.S. employers in a single month, November 2008, during the Great Recession. To put that into perspective, at the time, that was the largest single-month job loss in 34 years. When the dominoes fall, they fall hard and incredibly fast. And the long-term pain of a severe downturn expands rapidly. 5.1 million. That represents the massive total number of job losses tracked by March 2009, which was just over a year after that specific recession began back in December 2007. We're talking about millions of households radically shifting from a state of financial stability into a state of sheer survival. Moving right along to Section 3, the consumer wallet squeeze. If you look at this comparison, notice how the conditions of a normal economy completely invert when we cross the recession threshold. It's like flipping a switch. Confidence just plummets. Debt grows to exceptionally high levels, and as a direct result, consumer spending dries up. This massive psychological shift, which economists sometimes call a shift in animal spirits, basically just means consumers are terrified, and they simply do not want to spend their cash. And that drop in spending is highly specific. Plummeting consumer confidence forces everyday people like us to radically alter our habits. According to the data, we start doing something called trading down, swapping out expensive name-brand goods for generic private label brands. People stop going out to restaurants and start eating at home a lot more. And luxury purchases, fashion, beauty, jewelry, along with non-essential experiences like travel, those are abruptly postponed. Discretionary income essentially evaporates and survival mode completely kicks in.
Now for the really fascinating stuff in Section 4, weird economic warning signs.
Remember that quirky question I asked at the beginning? Here's where it all makes sense. First up, sausages. Experts actually monitor what they call the trade-down effect right at the grocery store. When budgets shrink and food prices just feel way too high, shoppers swap out expensive steaks and premium meats for cheaper protein substitutes, like sausages. A sudden, widespread spike in sausage sales tells economists that households are definitely feeling the squeeze and stretching their shrinking budgets. It's a surprisingly accurate harbinger of an economic downturn.
And then there's plunging men's underwear sales. I kid you not, former Federal Reserve head Alan Greenspan notoriously saw men's underwear as a key economic predictor. The logic is actually super fascinating. Men's underwear is a hidden necessity. When times are tough, guys will just stretch the lifespan of the current underwear to save money, rather than going out and replacing it. During the 2008 financial crisis, men's underwear sales dropped significantly, perfectly mirroring the severe reduction in consumer spending. It's this tiny, micro behavior that reveals a massive macro panic.
That leads us nicely into Section 5, the paradox of saving.
Okay, so this is where things get really fascinating, but also kind of frustrating. It's called the paradox of thrift. Here's the deal. If you fear losing your job, it is completely optimal and totally responsible for you to save more money, right? However, because my spending is literally your income in our interconnected economy, if too many consumers attempt to save simultaneously, overall demand just collapses and the economic plunge deepens. Ultimately, what saves the individual actually harms the collective.
We can build on that paradox by looking at what economists call a balance sheet recession. This typically happens right after a major economic bubble bursts. Think real estate or a financial asset bubble. Suddenly, the value of people's assets falls way below the debt they originally took on to buy them, leaving them with negative equity. In a total panic, large numbers of consumers and corporations stop spending and instead aggressively pay down their debts to repair their balance sheets. They save rather than spend or invest, and the entire economy just slows to a crawl. To validate just how powerful this phenomenon is, Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman actually hit the nail on the head regarding the 2008 crash. He noted that the financial crisis was really just a manifestation of excessive debt, explicitly calling it a balance sheet recession. When highly indebted American families desperately had to pay down the massive debts they ran up during the housing bubble years, they simply couldn't spend. And because nobody else was stepping up to take up the slack in spending, the U.S. economy was essentially stalled.
So what happens when you, your neighbors, and all these massive corporations become net savers simultaneously? According to economists like Richard Koo, who extensively studied Japan's Great Recession, traditional monetary policy, like the central bank lowering interest rates, doesn't really work well. Why? Because nobody wants to borrow money anyway. They're too busy paying off their old debts. In this scenario, government stimulus spending becomes the primary remedy. When the private sector simply won't spend, the government has to step in, run deficits, and spend money to maintain the level of GDP and avoid a full-blown depression.
Which leaves us with this final, pretty provocative thought to chew on. If securing your own finances, saving your money, paying down your debt, skipping the luxuries, actually stalls the global recovery because of the paradox of thrift, how do you balance your checkbook during the next downturn? You are caught in this incredible, almost impossible tension between protecting your own family's future and supporting the broader economy. It's a complex, challenging reality that proves just how intimately the global economy is tied directly to your wallet. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. I really hope this helped you see the massive economic forces all around us in a completely new light.